Mystery Channel, where we bring the past to life through soothing sounds and gentle storytelling. Today we explore the captivating and intricate reasons behind the Viking raids that took them to distant lands. Imagine yourself in the harsh yet beautiful landscapes of Scandinavia, surrounded by fjords, longships, and a society driven by exploration and conquest. Our journey will also delve into the dynamics of Viking settlements, particularly in Ireland and Great Britain, where new archaeological discoveries challenge long-held notions. Let the calming narration guide you as we uncover the origins, motivations, and significant events of these daring ventures. Close your eyes, relax, and let the gentle sounds of history transport you to a time of fierce warriors, intricate cultural exchanges, and profound transformation. Join us on this serene journey as we unravel the compelling stories of Viking raids and settlements. The reasons behind Viking raids into far-off lands have been theorized extensively, with historians and archaeologists examining various socio-economic and environmental factors. Viking settlements, particularly in Ireland and Great Britain, provide a wealth of evidence suggesting that these ventures were initially male-driven, as seen in the nature of the raids and the roles of men in combat and exploration. However, the discovery of graves containing nearly equal numbers of men and women challenges this long-held notion. Traditional methods for determining sex relied heavily on the types of burial artifacts found with the deceased, which could be influenced by cultural practices and gender roles of the time. Modern techniques, such as osteology and isotope analysis, now provide more precise information about the sex and origin of individuals, though DNA sampling, while highly accurate, is often impractical due to the degradation of genetic material over time. For instance, on the Isle of Man, male graves from the Viking era frequently feature names of Norse origin, while female graves typically have names that are local and indigenous. This suggests a blending of cultures where Viking men settled and intermarried with local women. Old texts about the founding of Iceland, such as the Landnámabók, mention the presence of Irish and British women among the settlers. This indicates that Viking explorers either brought these women with them, possibly through marriage alliances, or as captives taken during raids. Genetic studies in the Western Isles and the Isle of Skye have shown that Viking settlers were predominantly male who interbred with local women. In contrast, the Shetland Islands present evidence suggesting that Viking migration involved whole family units, including women and children. This is likely because the Shetland Islands' proximity to Scandinavia made it easier for entire families to relocate, unlike the more distant and challenging settlements further north and west, which were probably the domain of ambitious single male colonizers looking to establish new territories. Having discussed the motivations and the people involved in Viking expansions, let's turn to the chronology and locations of their activities. Vikings are often associated with their notorious raids on England, Scotland, and Wales, regions that were relatively short sea journeys from their Scandinavian homelands. The Vikings first arrived in England in 786 during the reign of King Bertric of Wessex. Mistaken for merchants, 3 Norse ships landed at Portland Bay in Dorset. The local reeve, an official of the king, directed them to a royal estate where the Vikings betrayed his trust and killed him and his men. This marked the beginning of a series of brutal and opportunistic attacks on the English coast. On June 8th, 793, the infamous raid on Lindisfarne took place, where the Vikings looted the church, desecrated religious relics, and murdered the monks. This according to the 12th century chronicler Simeon of Durham. Some monks were killed or thrown into the sea, while others were taken as slaves along with church treasures. The repeated Viking assaults led the monks to abandon Lindisfarne in 875, taking St. Cuthbert's relics with them to ensure their safety. In 794, the wealthy monastery at Jarrow was targeted by Viking raiders. Unlike previous encounters, the monks and local population offered unexpected resistance. Although the Vikings initially managed to escape with their plunder, their ships were stranded at Tynemouth, where the crew was killed by locals. This incident served as a temporary deterrent, and there were no further major raids on England for about 40 years, as the Vikings turned their attention to easier targets in Ireland and Scotland, exploiting the political fragmentation and wealth of these regions. A major shift in Viking activity occurred in 865, when various Danish Viking groups formed the Great Heathen Army and landed in East Anglia. This coalition of warriors, led by legendary figures such as Ivar the Boneless and Halfdan Ragnarsson, began a sustained campaign of conquest. They captured York in Northumbria in 866, establishing it as a major Viking hub. By 871, the Great Heathen Army had divided, with one faction continuing their campaign in Wessex, while the other settled in Northumbria, leading to the creation of the Danelaw, a region of England under Viking control. The fragmented English kingdoms struggled to resist the Viking onslaught until King Alfred of Wessex secured a decisive victory over Guthrum at the Battle of Edington in 878. This victory led to the Treaty of Wedmore and later the Treaty of Alfred and Guthrum, which established boundaries between English and Viking territories and marked the beginning of a more stable, albeit uneasy, coexistence between the two cultures. Despite these treaties, skirmishes between the English and Vikings persisted. Alfred's successors gradually reclaimed territory, including the strategic city of York. Viking activity saw a resurgence in 947, when Eric Bloodaxe, a formidable Viking leader, captured York, briefly re-establishing a Norse foothold in the region. The Viking influence in England continued into the reign of Cnut the Great, a Danish king who ruled England from 1016 until his death in 1035. During his reign, Cnut successfully maintained control over England, creating a North Sea empire that included Denmark and Norway. However, disputes among Cnut's heirs after his death led to a weakening of their control over England, culminating in a succession crisis following the death of Edward the Confessor in 1066. In 1066, Harald Hardrada of Norway, claiming the English throne, attempted an invasion but was defeated by King Harold Godwinson at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. However, Harold Godwinson's victory was short-lived, as he soon faced another threat from William the Conqueror, Duke of Normandy. At the Battle of Hastings later that year, William defeated Harold Godwinson, leading to Harold's death and the end of Anglo-Saxon rule. William's coronation on Christmas Day, 1066, marked the beginning of Norman rule in England, although it took several years of campaigning and consolidation to fully establish his control over the kingdom. The Danish king, Sweyn Estridsson, briefly supported Edgar the Aetheling, the last male member of the royal house of Cerdic of Wessex, in 1070. However, Sweyn eventually accepted payment from William the Conqueror and withdrew his support. Viking raids continued sporadically during the reign of King Stephen in the mid-12th century. King Eystein II of Norway took advantage of the civil war in England to raid the east coast in 1152, targeting towns such as Hartlepool and Whitby. These raids are considered the final significant Viking activities in England, marking the end of the Viking Age in the region. The Iona Monastery, located on Scotland's west coast, first faced Viking raids in 794. These raids were part of a larger pattern of Norse incursions in the British Isles. Despite the monastery's remote location, it suffered multiple devastating attacks over the next 50 years, leading to its eventual abandonment. Detailed records from this period are scarce, but archaeological and historical evidence indicates that Scandinavian influence in Scotland increased significantly during the 830s. Norwegian Vikings established significant colonies in the northern and western Isles, including Shetland, Orkney, and the Hebrides. These territories fluctuated between being fiefs under the King of Norway and operating independently under local rulers, such as the Kings of the Isles and the Jarls of Orkney. Shetland and Orkney remained under Norse control until they were formally integrated into Scotland in 1468 as part of a dowry agreement. Unlike other parts of the British Isles, Viking settlements were scarce in Wales. This scarcity is often attributed to the robust and unified defences led by Welsh kings, particularly Rhodri the Great. His effective military strategies and leadership thwarted Viking attempts to establish permanent bases or gain significant territorial control in Wales. Viking activities in Wales were mostly limited to occasional raids and trade engagements. Notable among these efforts was the raid on Anglesey in 854, which ultimately failed due to the strong resistance mounted by the Welsh defenders. Rhodri the Great earned his moniker for good reason, and his successes against the Vikings are well documented. In 856, 2 years after achieving a significant victory by defeating and killing the Danish leader King Gorm, Rhodri's military prowess continued to shine. According to the Brut I Tywysogion, he secured 2 more major victories in 872. The first occurred at the location known as Bam or Banau, where Rhodri's forces decisively defeated a Viking contingent. The second battle took place at Managid, where the remaining Viking forces were ruthlessly exterminated by Rhodri's army. Additionally, the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle records that in 893, a coalition of West Saxons and North Welsh forces pursued Viking armies along the River Severn, culminating in a significant Viking defeat at the Battle of Buttington in Wales. This event further demonstrated Rhodri's effective leadership and the strong resistance put up by the Welsh against the Viking incursions. The early Normans, with their rich maritime heritage, often adopted Viking names, significantly influencing place names in the region. This Norse legacy is particularly evident in many coastal names in Wales that diverge from their original Welsh forms. For instance, the English name for Anglesey, derived from Old Norse, contrasts with its Welsh name, Ynys Mon. Similarly, the English names for other islands like Caldy Islands, Ynys Beer, and Flatholm, Ynys Egni, reflect their Viking origins, showcasing the extent of Norse influence in the area. Swansea's English name, originating from the Old Norse Swain's Island or Inlet, highlights its roots in Viking history, specifically linked to Sweyn Forkbeard's trading post. Additionally, Worm's Head, derived from the Old Norse word for dragon or snake, Orm, alludes to a Viking myth of a sleeping dragon, further emphasising the cultural imprint left by the Norse. In Cornwall, Viking raids are documented as early as 833 in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, with attacks on places like Jarmuth and the devastation of Lidford in 997. These early incursions were part of a broader pattern of Viking activity in the British Isles. By 1001 to 1003, Vikings occupied Exeter, demonstrating their ability to penetrate deep into the English territory. Cornwall eventually fell under English control in 936 during King Athelstan's reign, and was fully integrated into England after the Norman conquest. Early Viking raids also targeted monastic settlements in Gaelic Island around 795, including a significant raid on Howth in 821, where many inhabitants were captured. By the 840s, Vikings began establishing permanent bases in Ireland, such as Dublin, which remains a significant city today. These bases facilitated further raids and the expansion of Viking influence to major inland settlements like Armagh and Kells. Viking dominance in Ireland featured notable figures like Amlaib, Olaf, the Viking king of Dublin in 853, and power struggles involving the Immerse dynasty, which re-established Dublin as a major Viking base around 914. This era saw the emergence of Ireland's first large towns like Waterford and Limerick, which became significant trading hubs, particularly in the slave trade, linking to Moorish Spain. Over time, the integration of Viking and Irish cultures led to the rise of the Norse Gaels, with Viking leaders extending their influence beyond Ireland to territories, including the Kingdom of the Isles and York. By 980, Viking influence in Ireland began to wane, highlighted by Maelsegnal Mor's victory over the Dublin Vikings. The decline continued with the rise of Brian Boru, a powerful Irish king who sought to unite the country under his rule. Despite initial resistance from the Vikings, including the battles of Glenmama and Clontarf, the Viking presence in Ireland significantly reduced after their defeat at Clontarf in 1014. This battle, while not completely eliminating the Viking threat, curtailed their influence and paved the way for a more unified Irish kingship. Moving on to the continent, Normandy, or Northmania, translates to Land of the Norsemen, reflecting its Viking origins. The region experienced frequent Viking raids starting in the mid-9th century, with Norsemen targeting significant locations such as Rouen, Paris, and Jumièges Abbey. Frankish rulers, including Charles the Bold and later Charles the Simple, struggled to repel these invasions, often resorting to large payments of silver and gold to the Vikings as a means of buying peace. A pivotal moment came in 911 with the siege of Chartres. Following this siege, Rollo, a prominent Viking leader, was granted control of the region through the Treaty of Saint-Clair-sur-Epte by King Charles the Simple. This agreement established Rollo as the first Norman Count of Rouen, requiring his conversion to Christianity and marriage to Gisela, Charles's illegitimate daughter. The treaty marked the inception of the Duchy of Normandy, officially recognising the lands Rollo and his followers had previously seized by force. The integration of Rollo's Viking contingent with the local Frankish and Gallic populations led to the emergence of the Normans, a unique cultural blend that retained significant Norse influences, particularly in maritime vocabulary and place names, while adopting the Gallo-Romance languages and local customs. This blending of cultures laid the foundation for the Normans' future prominence in European history, particularly with their conquest of England in 1066. The legacy of the Normans endured prominently through the lineage of Rollo, a Viking leader who became the first ruler of Normandy. His descendants, particularly William the Conqueror, dramatically regime. As King of England, William and his successors not only retained their Norman territories in France, but also found themselves embroiled in numerous territorial disputes with the French crown. These conflicts over claims and control of lands eventually culminated in the prolonged and devastating 100 Years' War, sparked by France's confiscation of Gascony in 1337, which was a crucial possession for the English crown. In the 9th century, Viking raids were particularly severe in West Francia and Middle Francia, regions corresponding roughly to modern-day France and parts of Germany, respectively. The Viking incursions were more frequent and destructive in these areas compared to East Francia, which encompasses parts of present-day Germany and Central Europe. During the reign of Charles the Bold, who ruled from 843 to 877, some of the worst invasions took place. To counter these threats, Charles implemented several defensive measures, most notably the Edict of Destress in 864. This edict was a comprehensive military reform that established a permanent cavalry force and ordered the construction of fortified bridges to protect against inland Viking raids. Despite these efforts, the Vikings formed alliances with local powers such as the Bretons and regional leaders like Robert the Strong of Neustria. These alliances complicated Charles's efforts to defend his realm, leading to significant battles like the Battle of Brisart in 865, where both Robert and Ranulf of Aquitaine were killed. During Charles's early reign in the 840s, internal strife within the Frankish territories, particularly in Aquitaine, created opportunities for Viking incursions. The civil discord was so severe that Pepin II, one of Charles's rivals, enlisted Viking support against him. This collaboration led to Viking settlements at strategic river mouths, including the Garonne and the Loire, which facilitated further raids. Defenders of these regions, such as the Gascony dukes Seguin II and William Nar, made valiant but ultimately unsuccessful efforts to protect cities like Bordeaux from Viking attacks. Sancho Mitara, another local leader, eventually negotiated with the Vikings, settling some of them at the mouth of the Adour near Bayonne. This settlement was a precursor to the Treaty of Saint-Clair-sur-Epte in 911, which formalised the creation of the Viking-controlled territory of Normandy, marking a significant turning point in the history of Viking integration into European society. Throughout the 9th and 10th centuries, Viking raids continued to plague the towns along the Low Countries coast and rivers. The Vikings established lasting bases and were sometimes recognised as lords in areas like Saint-Florent-le-Vieil and Thionville. Notable Viking settlements included Noirmoutier, Bayonne, and along the Seine in what would become Normandy. Significant raids during this period targeted Antwerp in 836, followed by attacks on other major cities such as Ghent, Courtrai, Tournai, Leuven, and areas along the Meuse and Rhine rivers. These raids led to the establishment of raiding bases in strategic locations such as Asselt, Beringen, and Elburg, allowing the Vikings to launch further incursions into the heart of Europe. In this historical context, Viking leaders like Rorik of Dorestad and his brother Harold played influential roles in the Low Countries. By 850, Lothair, the emperor of the Carolingian Empire, recognised Rorik as a ruler over much of Frisia, marking a significant moment in Viking integration into European political structures. Later, in 870, Rorik swore allegiance to Charles the Bold, further solidifying his position. Despite these political manoeuvres, Viking raids continued, as evidenced by the substantial silver treasures buried in places like Viringen, indicating significant settlement and wealth accumulation. By 879, another Viking leader, Godfrid, terrorised the Low Countries, using Ghent as a base to launch devastating raids on several cities. He controlled Frisia until his assassination in 885, after which Viking rule in the region began to decline. The intensity of Viking raids diminished significantly, with notable attacks ceasing by 1007, marked by the final raids in Tiel and Utrecht. Shifting to the west, the Iberian Peninsula experienced relatively less Viking activity compared to other parts of Western Europe. Both the Christian northern regions and the Muslim southern territories were minimally affected by Viking incursions. Most knowledge of Viking presence in Iberia comes from later written sources, which are often ambiguous and sometimes unreliable regarding the exact origins or ethnicity of the raiders. Archaeological evidence supporting Viking activity in Iberia is limited, but continues to grow as ongoing research uncovers more about their presence, which began around the mid-9th century. While there were Viking raids and possible overwintering in the region, substantial evidence of extensive trade or permanent settlement remains lacking. This contrasts with other parts of Europe, where Viking influence was more pronounced and long-lasting. Expanded paragraphs. One notable incident occurred in 844, when Viking raiders, renowned for their seafaring prowess and ferocious attacks, sailed up the Guadalquivir River, launching a series of destructive attacks on the regions of Galicia and Asturias in the northwestern part of the Iberian Peninsula. Their approach brought them face to face with the formidable defences of King Ramiro of Asturias, whose forces were well prepared for the Viking onslaught. The Asturian army utilised Galician crossbows, a powerful torsion-powered projectile weapon that proved devastatingly effective against the Viking invaders. In the ensuing battle, the Vikings suffered a severe defeat, with many of their warriors falling to the lethal crossbow bolts. In a decisive and symbolic act of victory, the Asturians captured 70 Viking ships, which were subsequently burned on the beach as a stark warning to other would-be invaders. Following their defeat in Asturias, the Vikings redirected their focus southward, continuing their campaign of terror by raiding coastal cities such as Lisbon and Seville. The raid on Seville was particularly significant, marking one of their more notable and destructive attacks on the Iberian Peninsula. Between 859 and 861, the intensity of Viking raids in the region increased, largely attributed to a cohesive group of marauders targeting both northern Iberia and Al-Andalus, the Muslim-ruled territories of southern Spain. In a bold and unprecedented move in 859, these Vikings managed to capture King Garcia Iniguez of Pamplona, holding him a hostage and demanding an enormous ransom for his release. Their reach extended beyond the Iberian Peninsula, striking various Mediterranean locations and possibly overwintering in Francia after their raids. However, after the 860s, records of Viking activities in Iberia diminish, only to re-emerge in the 960s and 970s. During this period, historical accounts from sources like Dudo of St. Quentin, Ibn Hayyan, and Ibn Idari, along with Christian Iberian charters, provide credible evidence of renewed Viking raids. Interestingly, archaeological evidence from the 10th or 11th century, including fragments of mouse bones found in Madeira, suggests that Vikings reached the island and introduced mice well before its official colonisation by Portugal. In the early 11th century, various sources, including Icelandic sagas and northern Iberian charters, reported ongoing minor Viking raids in the region. As the Viking Age waned, Scandinavians and Normans continued to visit and raid Iberia, often on their way to the Holy Land for pilgrimages, crusades, or as part of the Norman conquest of the Mediterranean. Notably, figures such as Sigurd Jorsalfar of Norway and Rognvald Kali Kolsson were among those who continued these activities. Around 860, accounts from Ermentarius of Noirmoutier and the Annals of Saint-Bertin recorded that Vikings based in France ventured to Iberia before proceeding towards Italy, highlighting the extensive reach of their maritime expeditions. In the late 11th century, several Swedish runestones commemorated warriors who perished in Langbardaland, the Old Norse name for southern Italy or Langobardia. These inscriptions imply that these individuals were Varangian mercenaries employed by the Byzantine Empire rather than Normans. Historical records suggest that Varangians might have served as mercenaries in Italy against the Arabs as early as 936. Subsequently, many Anglo-Danish and Norwegian nobles participated in the Norman conquest of southern Italy. Harald Hardrada, who later became King of Norway, notably took part in this conquest in Sicily around 1038 to 1040, serving under leaders such as William de Hauteville. Another significant figure, Edgar the Etheling, who left England in 1086, also travelled to the region, as did Erling Skakke, who earned his nickname in battles against Arabs in Sicily. Additionally, numerous Anglo-Danish individuals fleeing William the Conqueror's rule joined the Byzantine forces in their conflicts against Robert Guiscard, Duke of Apulia in southern Italy. Harald Hardrada also served the Byzantine Emperor in Palestine and conducted raids across North Africa, the Middle East, and as far as Armenia and Sicily, as chronicled in Snorri Sturluson's Heimskringla. Evidence of Norse activity in Arabia and Central Asia appears on runestones in Scandinavia, commemorating Vikings who died in Sörkland, a term possibly referring to areas around the Black Sea or beyond. Meanwhile, the Norse known as Rus in the eastern Mediterranean primarily engaged in trade, but occasionally in hostilities, including raids in the Caspian in 910, 912, and 943, along the Baltic Sea and major inland rivers now within Russian territories such as Staraya, Ladoga, and Novgorod. Vikings known as Varangians or Rus established several settlements. These settlements became hubs of trade, colonization, piracy, and mercenary activities, utilizing the extensive river systems and portages of Gardariki. Their significant role in regional affairs began when Slavic tribes invited them to establish order amid constant tribal warfare, leading to Rurik's leadership and the subsequent establishment of the Rurikid dynasty, which ruled Kiev and Rus and later Muscovy until 1598. Certainly, here's the expanded version of the provided paragraphs. The Varangians, an elite group of Viking warriors, were known for their extensive travels and influence across various regions. They reached the Caspian Sea and Constantinople, playing a significant role in the geopolitics of these areas. One notable Varangian, Ingvar the Far-Travelled, embarked on a series of daring expeditions to Iran and the Caucasus between 1036 and 1042. His journeys are immortalised on the Ingvar runestones, a series of memorial stones scattered across Sweden. These stones serve as historical records, highlighting the far-reaching influence of the Varangians. Around the year 1036, a group of Varangians established a settlement in Georgia near the Rioni River village of Bashkijet. They had travelled a long and arduous route from Scandinavia through the rivers of Russia, navigating the Dnieper River and finally crossing the Black Sea. King Bagrat IV of Georgia welcomed these formidable warriors, integrating several hundred of them into his army. Their prowess in battle was demonstrated at the Battle of Sasireti in 1042, where their contributions were pivotal. Nadad, a pioneering settler from Norway, is credited as the first known person to land on Iceland. His journey began with an intended voyage from Norway to the Faroe Islands. However, he lost his way and found himself on the east coast of Iceland. Impressed by the snowy landscape, he named it Schneeland, meaning snowland. Another sailor, Garda Svavarsson from Sweden, also accidentally arrived in Iceland. He discovered that it was indeed an island and named it Gardasholmi. Garda spent a winter at Húsavík, establishing a temporary settlement. The first intentional voyage to Iceland was made by Floki Vilgadarsson, also known as Raven Floki. He used ravens to help navigate and spent a winter at Bardastrand. Observing drift ice in the fjords, he aptly named the island, or Iceland. These early explorers set the stage for future settlements. The official settlement of Iceland began around 870 AD, with Ingolfur Arnason recognised as the first permanent settler. According to Icelandic sagas, Ingolfur threw 2 carved pillars into the sea, vowing to settle wherever they landed. These pillars were eventually found on the southwestern peninsula, now known as Reykjane. Around 874, Ingolfur established his home in what is now Reykjavik, named for the geothermal steam he observed in the area. This act marked the beginning of a new era for Iceland. However, there are claims that Natfari, a slave abandoned by Garda Svavarsson, might have been the first permanent settler, living there before Ingolfur's arrival. In 985, Eric the Red, a fiery and ambitious explorer, discovered Greenland after being exiled from Iceland for murder, a crime that typically resulted in expulsion. By 986, Eric returned with 14 of the 25 ships he had initially set out with, establishing settlements on Greenland's southwestern coast. These early Norse communities thrived modestly, benefiting from a warm period that allowed for the cultivation of rye and barley and the raising of livestock. Their primary export was walrus ivory, which they traded for essential imports like iron. By 1261, Greenland came under the sovereignty of the Norwegian king. At its peak, the settlements housed around 5,000 people, organised around 250 farms within 14 church-centred communities, including an impressive cathedral at Garda. Despite their early success, the settlements eventually declined due to a worsening climate and increasing isolation. By 1450, they had disappeared, having lost contact with both Norway and Iceland. Around the same period, around 985, Norwegian ship captain Bjarni Herjolfsson accidentally encountered the North American continent while en route from Iceland to Greenland, blown off course by strong winds. This accidental discovery paved the way for further Norse explorations westward, led by figures such as Leif Erikson. These expeditions were driven by the need to harvest large timber, which was scarce in Greenland's barren landscapes. In addition to timber, the Norse engaged in hunting and trading with the indigenous Inuit communities on Ellesmere Island, Skraeling Island, and Ruin Island. These interactions highlighted the Norse's ability to adapt and engage with diverse cultures during their explorations. One significant Norse settlement was Lanso Meadows in Newfoundland, Canada. This remarkable archaeological site featured timber-framed buildings that have been meticulously dated to the year 1021. The dating was confirmed through dendrochronological analysis, which examines tree rings. This method linked the construction to a carbon-14 spike caused by a significant solar storm in 993, providing an accurate timeline for the settlement's establishment. The findings indicate that Norse settlers were actively living in the area by that year. Historical records document interactions between the Vikings and the Native Americans, whom the Norse referred to as Skraelings. This term, depending on the context and translation, could imply a view of the indigenous people as either barbarians or weaklings. Despite some instances of trade, tensions and conflicts arose, primarily due to the advanced native weaponry such as bows and arrows. These hostilities ultimately led to the Norse abandoning their attempts to maintain a presence in the region. The Norse explorers named the territory they ventured into Finland, a name that has sparked considerable debate among historians. Traditionally, it was interpreted as wineland, suggesting the presence of wild grapes. More recent interpretations propose that it could mean meadow or pasture land, reflecting the landscape's potential for grazing. Regardless of the etymology, the Norse efforts to establish a permanent colony in Finland were unsuccessful. The strong presence and resistance of native groups equipped with formidable weaponry and tactics forced the Norse to retreat back to their settlements in Greenland, marking an end to their colonization attempts in North America. Speculation exists that the Vikings may have discovered Svalbard as early as the 12th century, referring to it in Norse records as Svalbard, which translates to cold shores. This name might have also been used to describe Jan Mayen or certain regions of eastern Greenland. However, the first widely recognised and undisputed discovery of the Svalbard archipelago was made by the Dutch explorer Willem Barents in 1596. His exploration added a significant chapter to the history of Arctic exploration long after the Norse records. Further research suggests that Norse explorers could have reached the Azores between 700 and 750 AD. A compelling 2015 study found significant mitochondrial DNA similarities between mice from the Azores and those from Scandinavia. This genetic link indicates that the mice may have been transported aboard Viking ships, mirroring patterns observed in other regions visited by the Norse. This period also aligns with an increase in 5-beta stigmastanol, an organic compound associated with ruminant feces, detected in sediment layers from this era across 5 lakes in the Azores. The presence of this compound, along with a noted decrease in native tree pollen and an increase in carbon particles, suggests significant deforestation, likely to create pasture land for livestock. These environmental changes imply the presence of human settlers who needed land for their animals. Subsequent studies highlight consistent levels of livestock fecal sterols and carbon particles after 950 AD. Climate models from the period suggest that prevailing northeast winds could have facilitated direct Viking navigation from Scandinavia to the Azores, bypassing Portugal. This direct route is further supported by trade route analysis, showing how a Scandinavian mouse could reach Portugal and then the Azores, showcasing the extensive and interconnected nature of Viking maritime movements. As we conclude our serene journey through the Viking Age, we've delved into the complex motivations behind the Vikings' far-reaching raids and the intricate web of their settlements in lands both near and far. From the shores of Ireland and Great Britain to the distant and mysterious reaches of North America, the Vikings left an indelible mark on history. Their narrative is one of relentless exploration, fierce conquest, and rich cultural fusion, challenging traditional perceptions and illuminating the interconnectedness of the medieval world. As you slowly return to the present, let the echoes of Norse sagas and the gentle waves of history remind you of the resilient spirit and enduring legacy of the Vikings. Thank you for joining us on the ASMR History Channel. Until our next adventure, may you find peace and wonder in the stories of the past.